Hey, folks, it is April the 28th, and this is Western Civilization / World History. And today we are going to talk about America's involvement in World War I and move on beyond that. Please keep in mind your projects are due tomorrow, and so the next couple of days here in class will be devoted towards that, so we're not going to have a live stream. I'm expecting our next live stream is going to be Monday, but I'll let you know in the Google Classroom. So last time we ended off talking about the technologies and some of the tactics and things like that was going on in the First War. And so we see that it's pretty much a stalemate, and that means one side is not defeating the other. They're both fixed, essentially in the same trenches, not moving for months on end. And here we have the Doughboys. So these are American troops known as Doughboys, or also the Yanks, marching in England as they starting essentially I think most of them actually land in France because we are going to be allied with the French and the British. So, all right. So World War I, the U.S. Eventually, after the sinking of American merchant ships by German submarines. Remember, we talked about the German U-boats, the underwater boats, the submarines. We talked about how they were super scary. They were blowing boats out of the water without really checking, just because, according to international law, they weren't supposed to fire on civilian boats, and they weren't allowed to sink a civilian boat unless they first did this. You board the ship, search it, let the people off in the life rafts, and then you can sink it. And so you search it to make sure it didn't have weapons and stuff, right? But they weren't doing that. They were just shooting them down. And the revelation that Germans were trying to incite Mexico to make war on the United States. We intercepted a secret telegram that had to actually pass through U.S. wires before it reached Mexico, that they were trying to talk Mexico into invading the United States. But the thing is, Mexico was having a really hard time during this period anyways. For one, they didn't have that much hostilities with the U.S. For two, they were having a revolution. They were trying to clean it up. And so they just couldn't do that. And so the United States, you can understand, people get super mad. If you find out that country A is trying to have your neighbor invade you, that's provocation for war. If somebody's trying to talk a country into having war with you, that's a reason to have war with them. And Mexico is, of course, calling them crazy for this. But Hitler's going to do something similar later on. For some reason, the Germans keep thinking that Mexico wants to invade America. The U.S. declared war on Germany.
Maybe next time?
Maybe next time, Germany. Maybe next time. On the 6th of April, 1917. I think it's just they just had no idea what people on this half of the world were thinking. I don't know. So then the thing is, though, before war was declared, President Woodrow Wilson knew that we're probably going to get into war. So we had already started training the soldiers, getting things ready, like money and stuff like that, and equipment. Traditionally, but especially before World War II, in the United States, we didn't keep very large army. We would have officers and sergeants, which we call non-commissioned officers. They would work full time, and they would be there so that if we called for an army, they could train them up real quick. And they could also activate the militias, which we sometimes called National Guard. But so they had to have time to get the troops ready. And so that's why you see we declared war in April of 1917. It's going to be about a year later before we can actually get our troops over there. But ultimately, the American Expeditionary Force, known as the AEF, would reach some 2 million troops. So it was a big effort. We were all in. A lot of Americans were pretty upset because the thing is, during this time period, there was more and more people in America who had German ancestry. And so they supported naturally their grandparents and their parents' home country, Germany. There were, of course, a lot of people of French and English descent as well. And a lot of people didn't want to get involved in a European war because they remembered the words of George Washington in his farewell address. no entangling alliances, which is what started all this, and avoid foreign wars, which this was. So, however, young men in particular were really ready to join in on this. So the recruitment offices were packed with young guys taking the oath and joining the service. And this was very exciting to a lot of people. Most people back then were farmers, and they never went with that like 5 miles away from home. So the idea of going to a foreign country like France and like seeing a foreign country and going off and like living some kind of chivalric battle, it really appealed to them, right? So a lot of people joined that. Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, the horrors of war is going to hit them pretty hard, but we're gonna see that the Americans, we're not really going to be hurt, not nearly as bad as like the rest of the world. Like I told you, like they had like so many of their youth die off in this war, whereas America, yeah, we lost some people, but it wasn't nearly as bad. Of course, we're gonna help tip it in the Allies' favor. Some historians believe that the British and French would have won anyways, but it probably would have taken a little longer because the Germans are going to make some. They're running low on men and supplies, and then they're going to make a pretty bad mistake in a push to try to tip it in their favor. It's not the gamble's going to lose. All right, so this is 1 of 4. Keep in mind, World War I for the U.S. starts in 1917. And kind of like this stuff. So we're going to send 2 million troops over there. The Doughboys. Wouldn't mind having a World War I bayonet. Those things are like swords. All right, so here you see the little spikes on their helms. These were German troops. They had a little part of the Kaiser's army.
Why do they have?
That's kind of
It's ornamental.
yeah.
They were walking battle man unicorns, you know. So
And it makes them stand out because you just see this like little fin
Yeah.
like out of the trenches.
well, that's true, but also like it would help prevent friendly fire, right? If you see the spike and if you're German, you might not want to shoot it. Well, you know.
But what if you stole the helmet?
Ooh, what if? Yeah, well, what if indeed? What if indeed?
I'm
Then you
pretty
get
sure
afraid
some,
about friendly
I'm
fire.
pretty sure that
Yeah.
some people that have found souvenirs later on.
Oh
yeah.
gosh, I would love to have one of those.
Oh, you want some? I have some of those.
You have some German helmets from World War One.
I have World War II German helmet.
Yeah, I would like for real.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, I don't know if it's got a swastika on it. I don't want it though, because I don't want to like. I want my kids to be like, "Why do you have that?" They're like, "Oh, well, you see, I know a guy." You know.
See,
Well, yeah, that's probably like the least German vibes.
Let's have like a stormtrooper.
There's a flag.
Oh gosh. Okay. Well, we're gonna stop right there. All right. Yes. I don't know. Like collections are pretty cool, but I don't know.
There's some razors. There's like a bayonet. Like a
It's like,
bayonet.
what's the expensive one, like, actually.
Yeah, don't bring that to school though. I don't
And
want you
then
to
like like there's like the what's it like what are they called?
I remember Canton trade days used to have a bunch of that
Like
stuff.
the one like the general uniform like knife things
Wow,
for like parade and things.
that's cool. Yeah, like their dress military.
Yeah,
dress.
they got the dress.
Ooh, that's freaky.
Yeah.
Man, hold on to that stuff. Hold on to that stuff.
Yeah.
All right, so World War I, Russia. So remember I told you the Eastern Front, the Germans versus the Russians. This was like the harshest one, just like it'll be in World War II. Before entering the war, Russians were disenchanted with Tsar Nicholas due to the loss of the Russo-Japanese War. So before World War I, the Russian Tsar had some disagreements with Japan over who got to like have what part of China, and so they went to war. Most of the world thought that Japan was still stuck in the Middle Ages. They are going to be found to be woefully wrong because by this point, Japan, having been humiliated by the West, is going to send a lot of their people out into Western schools to learn how to use industry and technology. and they are going to have massive reforms. And within just one generation, they're going to go from the old samurai culture to industrialized West, just like that. It's going to be an entire transformation of a country. And so the Japanese are going to devastate and humiliate the Russian army. They walk into it thinking it's going to be some kind of silly little adventure, and then he's going to wind up having almost all of them killed. So he wasn't too famous with the Russians, or they didn't like him that much. They're like, you humiliated us. And also there was a family scandal involving this guy Rasputin. So he was an Eastern Orthodox monk, but really he couldn't have been further from it. He was a mystic. He would hold seances, and he was accused of witchcraft and all this other stuff. And there's going to be, like, the papers are going to say that the Tsar's wife is actually having an affair with Rasputin. And so Rasputin was known for being a drunk and a womanizer anyways. So that didn't really help out. And so also much of Russia had extreme poverty. And it's going to get worse with the war because, much like other countries, they're going to have to send a lot of their food and supplies off to the war effort, while the peasantry is just going to be there completely destitute. During World War I on the Eastern Front, Russia faced the heaviest casualties. By 1917, they're going to lose 5.5 million people. And so they're watching almost all of their young men going down there and getting killed in a war that they didn't quite understand why they were there. The Russians from all corners of society wanted peace and were discontent. So they were upset. They wanted it out of the war. The government continued to pledge support for the war, though. Tsar Nicholas was known for being pretty stubborn. He was known for being a very good family man, but he was known for being a really terrible leader. In fact, sometimes he was accused of shirking his duties so he could go play with his kids and stuff like that, which is fine if you're a regular dad. But if you're like a king, you might have to do king stuff instead. So maybe you don't have 5.5 million people die. So rough stuff. And under the surface of all this, and it's actually been going on for a while, you have revolutionary groups are popping up, such as the Bolsheviks led by Lenin and Stalin. During this time period, they're going to go out and they're going to meet groups of people and talk to them just about how bad conditions are and about how they could make them so much better if only they were in charge, right? And so, like, especially during, like next year, we talk quite a bit about this. And so Russians are unhappy. They're hungry. They have no jobs. They're in a war they didn't want to be in. Almost everybody has somebody close to them who's died in the war. And now you have a revolutionary group that's promising things can get better. We're even going to see the elites. The elites are also going to turn against the king and say, well, we want a constitutional monarchy like England. Everybody seems to want that. If you remember, that's how the French Revolution started. The nobles are like, well, we want a constitutional monarchy like England. And then they overthrew the king, but then the revolutionaries cut everybody's head off. So same thing's going to happen here. And there we have, this is a young Joseph Stalin, Vladimir Lenin, and this guy here, a lot of people don't know him. His name's Leon Trotsky. Leon Trotsky was a fervent worldwide Marxist, and we're going to see that Stalin's actually going to have him assassinated with some, ice picks to the head. So yeah, revolutionaries often turn on their own. It's because Stalin wanted to consolidate Russia and start a Russian empire. Trotsky wanted to go throughout the world and start revolutions everywhere. So Stalin thought he was too dangerous. All right, so cause of 1917 Russian revolutions. Widespread discontent among Russians across society. Agitation from revolutionaries, those Bolsheviks, right? So they're Marxist revolutionaries, promised peace, land, and bread. Sounds very similar to what the French revolutionaries asked for in the French Revolution. They called for, liberty, fraternity, and something else. Tsar Nicholas II proved to be a very weak leader. Russia faced devastating losses. We just saw that. So workers are going to have strikes and riots. even in the capital, over food and fuel shortages. This is going to lead to the abdication of the Tsar. His own parliament, called the Duma, is going to ask him to resign. And then you're going to have the elites, the aristocrats, the people who represented the Russians are going to try to form a new government. But it's going to be so slow that the revolutionaries are going to come in, and they know how to make it work because, well, they're going to tell them what to do because they have all the guns. So, whereas the Duma, their parliament, was trying to do it in a peaceful, academic, worldwide point of view way, the revolutionaries were like, nope, you're going to do what we say. And so, much like the French Revolution, they tried to do it academically, peacefully. They had the king abdicate, but then the guillotine guys came in and there was nothing they could do. So you got to be careful what you ask for in a revolution. Sometimes the violent guys take over. Guys go. I think this is 3 or 4. So I think I need to edit this one because this kind of says a lot of the same things that the last one said, but it's like in broader terms. But yeah, like the ideology of Marxism had actually been around quite a bit before this. And originally, Marxism wasn't about a violent revolution. They just believed that they knew how the world was going to go anyways. And so they thought that over time, eventually, property would the idea of property would go away, and people would work to the best of their ability, and others would just give them what they needed. You would have the loss of social structures such as laws and family and religion and all these other things, and eventually people would just kind of live. I don't know, like it's a kind of a strange concept because it's like the idea of a society that's never happened before. And so it's kind of hard to think of people living in that society. It was based on something called historicism, where you could use history to predict the future, but the future they predicted didn't match up with anything that's ever happened before. So I always found that to be kind of strange.
And then there was an awkward silence.
There was an awkward silence. But yeah, don't worry. There will be plenty of Marxists out there, and they are going to be one of the driving forces for the violent deaths of civilians in the 20th century. So they're actually going to have death camps that are going to kill more people than even the Nazis. So. So yeah, 20th century. The 20th century had some nice things happen, but especially like there's a lot of bad stuff that happened, as you well know, from like World War II and the Cold War and stuff. So all right, here's slide 4 of 4 of the day. Here's poor Tsar Nicholas in his last days. So you can see he looks pretty tired, worn out. He has guards behind him posing for a picture. Probably pretty humiliated. He always had bad press his whole life, being called incompetent. All he really wanted to do was be with his family. And then him and his family are going to be arrested and assassinated. So,
Did he have a family?
they were in separate rooms, but yeah, they were all brought to a basement, and the revolutionary shot them. So the kids and all the way up. 1917 Russian revolutions. In February 1917, the Duma, that's their Senate, their parliament, took control of the government. They intended to create a European-style parliamentary government. They're like, hey, yeah, let's be like the rest of the world, right? Because, well, the Russians were always kind of really slow in a lot of things. They were the last to stop serfdom. They didn't do it until, like, I think the 1860s. And they're going to be the last to have an absolute monarch. They're in the 20th century, and they still had an absolute monarch, really behind the times. Germans arranged for Vladimir Lenin to return to Russia in order to stir unrest for provincial government. So Vladimir Lenin had been calling for a revolution in Russia for years. And the Russians finally had enough. They'd been arresting him, didn't work, so they kicked him out of the country. Well, the Germans are like, hey, this guy wants to overthrow their government. We're at war with them. Let's sneak him back in there and see what happens. So yeah, they snuck him back into the country. He took back over his group and helped lead this revolution to try to like overthrow this new parliamentary government led by the Duma. While the Duma prolonged the war, they didn't want to end the war outright because they were afraid if they ended it too quickly, they would lose a lot of things like land, money, prestige with other countries. They wanted their new government to be legit, so they were taking too long. Lenin called for an immediate end to the war and communism. And so he had his group of Bolsheviks storm the Duma with rifles, put them all under arrest, and from there they claimed they had the government. And well, everybody went along with it. So from then on out, we'll come back next time and we'll talk a little bit more about this. This is important because this is going to help shape what happens in World War I. World War I is going to help shape so many things like the formation of new countries, World War II, a whole bunch of other stuff. So, and Russian history is going to be very tied to American history all the 20th century. We're going to be super, super focused on Russia all the way up until till the 90s, really. I hear about them all the time today, actually. So watch the news, and they're always talking something about Putin or something like that. So, hey, that's going to end it for today, kids. So please make sure that you use the rest of your time to get your project done and in tomorrow. See you later. It's weird because